One of the 613 mitzvahs mentioned in this week's Parsha is the mitzvah of Leisolin Pu'ulas Sachir, which means if you hire a worker to work for you for a certain day, you should pay him on that day, Leisave Olav Hashemesh, don't let the sun go down before paying him. A guy does a job for you. When he finishes the job, or if he's hired for a certain time, you pay him for his time. Now there's an interesting question that's addressed on this. It says in a medrash that what Hashem commands of the Jews, he does himself. In other words, it says that Hashem tells the Jews to put on tefillin. So actually, Hashem puts on tefillin, which is its own discussion. But when it comes to this mitzvah, it seems like Hashem doesn't do what he tells us to do. We're told that we need to pay our workers on the day that they do their job. We shouldn't push them to the next day. Yet by Hashem it says, we work during our lifetime, during our time on this earth. The reward comes after the time on this earth, in Olam Haba, or when Mashiach comes. So the question is, how does Hashem pay us for the work that we're doing now, only the next day? Seemingly that's against his mitzvah. So the Rebbe has a whole sikha on this, and it sounds like somewhat of a philosophical discussion, but it's actually very negea to how we view our lives. Explanation number one, we could say that maybe we're not day workers. Maybe we're hired throughout our lifetime. In other words, we're not hired day by day to do a job today, to do a job the next day, but we're hired throughout our entire lifespan to work in the service of Hashem and do Torah and mitzvahs. So therefore, Hashem doesn't owe us the money every day when we finish our job. Hashem owes us the money, so to say. He owes us our rewards when we finish our lifetime. At the end of our lifetime, that's when we get the reward, because it's not a bunch of different days of work. It's rather one hiring. Instead of hiring a day worker for today, 9 to 5, you hire him for a week job. You pay him at the end of the week, not at the end of the day. So we're hired for a lifetime. Perhaps that's the reason why Hashem pays us after our lifetime. Yet the Rebbe doesn't like this explanation, because ultimately, according to our tradition, Olam Haba, according to the way the Ramban learns it, doesn't mean heaven after the soul departs from the body. Olam Haba refers to the time when Mashiach comes. We've had many Jews the past thousands of years that have worked as faithful Jews, God-fearing Jews. They work their lifetime, their life's over, they go to heaven. But that's not their ultimate reward. Their ultimate reward is Olam Haba, when Mashiach comes. That is their real reward. Yet that is much after their life, much later than their life. It's been, some of them have passed and are in heaven already for thousands of years, hundreds of years. So how is Hashem pushing off their reward? Again, we're back at square one. They've worked their entire lifetime, even if you want to say that their work isn't a day-by-day job. Their entire lifespan is their job, so they should get paid immediately after. Why is it that Hashem is allowed to push off the reward until Mashiach comes? And over here, the Rebbe's explanation is that we need to review the way that we are hired by Hashem. We're not hired by Hashem as individual Jews to do a certain job. We're hired by Hashem to change the world. And that is a collective job that all of us throughout Jewish history are collectively hired to accomplish. We're all interconnected. And therefore, each individual Jew's job is done only when the world is made into Mashiach's world, when the Dir B'Tachtainim happens. In other words, there's two types of hiring. Let's bring this into actual business halacha. Sometimes you could hire a sachir, and sometimes you could hire a kablan. A sachir means you hire someone to put in certain hours. You don't hire him for a task, like a contractor to build a home for you. He's not hired for a certain amount of days. He's hired till he finishes his job. Sometimes you hire someone, a office secretary, isn't hired for they're hired for certain tasks, but they're paid for put in these amount of hours. But some people aren't hired as a sachir, they're hired as a kablan, which means it's not about the amount of time they're spending, but it's about a certain task needs to happen. So too over here, don't view the Jew's job as you need to put in your time. The Jew's job is part of the collective Jewish story. We're here to change the world, and we're here to bring God consciousness to this world, and to make this world a home, a seamless home for Hashem, the world's creator. And when the entire Jewish story is done, and when we finish making this world God's home, immediately the payment happens, and therefore Hashem isn't going against his mitzvah, and it is b'yom etitin schorei. Because even the Jews that came before us, their job's finished when we finish our job. Now this sounds like this is the end of the sikha. Or actually, there's more to the sikha, but this is what we're discussing today from the sikha. It sounds like a very interesting technical and philosophical discussion, but it's actually very relevant to the way we see our lives. Some Jews, sometimes we view ourselves as day workers. We're on the clock. We're here to do Torah mitzvahs, do our time. do as best as we can, and then we're done. In other words, we don't hold responsibility of reshaping this world. We do our time and do the best we can. Our mentality sometimes is to fall into sachar mode. We're here on the clock. We're here for a certain lifetime. Let's make it as meaningful as we can. However, that's not the ultimate true perspective. The ultimate true perspective is we're not here as a sachir. We are here as a kablan. We're not here to punch in time. We're here to accomplish a certain task. And that means we need to rewire the way we view our lives, to take responsibility for the world. Not just to do our time, to do as best as we can. But we're all hired collectively. The entire Jewish people, from the beginning of history until now, has been hired with one task: to be the light to this world and to bring God consciousness, godliness, through Torah mitzvahs to our world. And this is a new perspective that takes a new sense of responsibility. When I see people, when we see a world that seems so dark, so confused, so godless, instead of just saying, okay, so listen, the world's the world. Let me do as best as I can. It should keep us up at night sometimes. This is a world that God tasked us to change. And it's not enough that I'm doing my time. I'm not hired as a sachir. I'm hired as a kablan. And this is one thing we need to take away from the sikha. Another point we need to take away from the sikha is to not be so intimidated by how dark the world seems and how small I seem, because we're not hired as individuals. We're hired as part of the whole Jewish story. Us and Moshe Rabbeinu and all the tzaddikim that came before us are all on one team. Their job's not finished until we finish. We're interconnected to them, and we're just completing the job that they've been part of. So therefore, we don't need to be intimidated by this big world and feel like a small guy, a small fish in a big ocean, because we have all the giants. They're part of our story as well. An interesting story that I think is connected with this is the story of the Rebbe Rashab and Reb Chaim Brisker, who were part of a meeting in Russia when Russia was anti-Semitic, and they were trying to snuff out Judaism, and there was a asifa about certain chinuch decisions that the government wanted to make for the education of Jewish children. And they met together, they had a plan of how to approach the government and to try to abolish the negative decree, and it didn't work. And the Rebbe Rashab started crying. And Reb Chaim asked the Rebbe Rashab, Lubavitcher Rebbe, why are you crying? We did all that we can. We did what we got to do. It didn't work. And the Rebbe Rashab said, Aber der Inyan is nit ufkatan. We did all we can, yeah, but what we wanted to accomplish didn't accomplish. And this is a whole new perspective of taking responsibility for what has to happen, not only for us doing our time, but for what we want to make happen. When we're in a world right now where it could seem so dark, so anti-Semitic, so what's going to be? We could either just throw up our hands, that's one perspective. We could try to just play a part in this, or we could try to really take responsibility of bringing Mashiach, and to try to really come to the realization that we are these people that need to shape the world to what it needs to look like. And to own our lives, not just by trying to do our time as best as we can, but to focus it not clock-based, but task-based, and to try to accomplish this task while realizing how interconnected we all are with each other and with everyone that came before us. And with this, we could enter with a empowered, confident perspective that will be successful and eventually build this world to the dir b'tachtonim that it is meant to be. Have a great Shabbos.